Welcome, everybody. My name is Nikki Lefebvre. I'm the Executive Director of the Natick Historical Society. We were established in 1870, and today we remain an independent nonprofit that receives no public funds. And we really thrive on the support of our community members. So I want to just take a moment to begin by extending my thanks to all of you who support the Natick Historical Society. We deeply appreciate it. And thanks to all of you who are here tonight. Through your joint efforts, it makes it possible for us to offer free programs like this one to our community. We are really delighted to have with us Elissa Landre and Scott McCue, and I will formally introduce them in a moment. But first, I want to note that this is part of our Meet Our Neighbors series. And the goal of the series is really to shine a light on organizations that have shaped Natick in the past, in the present, and will continue to do so into the future. This is the second event in our spring series. We spoke with Deb Sayre from the Natick Farmers Market about a month ago, and that was great fun. It's now available on our YouTube channel if you are interested. And next up in our Meet Our Neighbors series is James Hearsom. He is the President and Executive Director of the Massachusetts Horticultural Society. He'll be speaking about the history and future of the Elm Bank site, Olmsted Garden, and the Baltzell-Cheney Manor House. And that will be on May 25th, also a Wednesday evening, also on Zoom. And you can register for that event on our website, www.natickhistoricalsociety.org. I also want to highlight just a couple of other upcoming events. This Saturday, April 30th, you can meet with us in person, believe it or not, at 58 Elliott Street for Earth Day all around Natick. And we'll be there to talk about the history of this land, along with the Bacon Free Library and a host of other local organizations with fun activities for all ages. So check it out. You can learn more about Earth Day programming at www.econatick.org. And I'm also happy to share that the program at Broadmoor in the morning, there will be a birding walk from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. And if you call up Broadmoor, there are still a few spots left, so don't delay and don't miss out on that wonderful program. Without further ado, let me now introduce our speakers for the evening. Elissa Landre is Mass Audubon's Community Advocacy and Engagement Manager for Metrowest. She works with municipalities and nonprofits on a variety of projects, including nature-based solutions to the effects of climate change. Bringing Mass Audubon's expertise in land protection and stewardship, education and advocacy together to meet community needs was a large part of her more than 30 years experience directing Broadmoor Wildlife Sanctuary. Under her leadership, Broadmoor hosted and facilitated numerous meetings of conservation nonprofits, legislators, and town officials, providing education on a wide variety of topics. Trained in biology, she has extensive knowledge of natural systems locally and globally, and has presented courses and workshops for diverse audiences. She especially loves sharing the wonders of our natural world in person and outdoors. No surprise there, Elissa. Scott McCue brings a strong background in education and nonprofit management to his work at Mass Audubon, where he serves as the Metrowest director. He worked from 2002 to 2012 to found and lead a 6th through 12th grade public school in Boston. And from 2012 to 2020, he served as Chief Operating Officer and Dean of the Sposato Graduate School of Education. Under his leadership, these organizations received national attention for their innovation in educating children and adults. In both roles, Scott worked to mobilize people and resources around ambitious goals, and he is eager to do the same in the Metrowest region. Scott's ability to speak in a passionate and compelling way about the importance of conservation and environmental education is born from his own commitment to this work and to his experience with the New England Forestry Foundation and graduate work in environmental sciences and policy. Scott is a graduate of Harvard College and Columbia University who spends his happiest free time hiking in the New England woods with his family. Scott and Elissa, we couldn't be more thrilled to have you with us tonight. So let's please give our speakers a warm but silent Zoom round of applause. And with that, Scott, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Nikki. Let's see if I can share the screen here. Y'all see the presentation? Great. So again, thank you all. It's wonderful to be here. I should share that the first 5 years of my career were actually as a secondary school history teacher. So history is my first love, and so thrilled to be here to share this. The other thing you might have picked up is I'm actually in my very first year at the team at Mass Audubon, and by Mass Audubon standards, you're a rookie for at least 5 or 10 years. So I'm brand new, just humbled and thrilled to be working alongside Elissa, who knows every foot of Broadmoor and its history, and has taught me most of what I know. So I'm really here tonight in my capacity as window dressing before we get to the good stuff that Elissa is going to share. But what we'd like to do is we want to sort of talk you through the history of Broadmoor as a set of connections between people and nature. And so Elissa and I are both dedicated and inspired by the history of the place. We think a useful way to understand what's happened at Broadmoor or over its life is a relationship between people and nature. We're also going to spend a minute talking about nature even before the people. So tonight's agenda is really in 4 parts. I'd like to give just a little bit of context on Broadmoor and Mass Audubon to talk about sort of this broader statewide organization that Elissa and I represent. Then I want to spend a minute on the first 4.4 billion years at Broadmoor. Then we're going to fast forward to the last 4,000 years at Broadmoor, and then we'll spend a little bit of time talking about the current day and what's new. So just by way of context, Broadmoor is part of a broader set of sanctuaries managed by Mass Audubon. Mass Audubon is a 125-year-old organization which protects the nature of Massachusetts for people and wildlife. We're in the business of conserving land. We're in the business of expanding access to nature and using nature as a vehicle for changing hearts and minds. We're organized around advocacy in defense of climate. Mass Audubon has 140,000 members and growing, and many dedicated supporters as well. Across Massachusetts, Mass Audubon manages 63 different sanctuaries. Many of those are unstaffed. 21 of them do have staff and do have programming and nature centers. And Broadmoor in Natick is one of those 21. It's one of the most popular sanctuaries in Massachusetts. And in fact, when people come to visit, even from other parts of the country and other parts of the world, Broadmoor is a popular destination. Okay, so I'm going to zoom way back, and I want to talk about the first 4.4 billion years in essentially 2 pieces. So I want to talk about the bedrock history of Broadmoor, and then I'm going to spend a minute on the sedimentary history. And both of these are relevant as people who are in the conservation business, who think a lot about sort of ecological systems. The geological underpinnings of the place really do influence the work that we do and the Broadmoor that we want to be sharing with the world. So once upon a time, roughly 500 million years ago, Broadmoor, Natick, and much of eastern Massachusetts were actually contained in 2 microcontinents, one of which was called Avalonia, the other of which was Laurentia. Both of these were located somewhere around the equator. A lot of the geologic activity that created modern day Broadmoor happened during that period of time. So most dramatically, about 450 years ago in Avalonia, there were a number of volcanic eruptions, which created a lot of the bedrock that we still see today. Between 425 and 375 million years ago, the collision between Avalonia and Laurentia produced a lot of the tallest mountains in New England. And so much of what we still experience as the Appalachian mountain range is actually sort of dates back to those early collisions. A lot of that volcanic rock is still evident at Broadmoor. So there's a volcanic rock called andesite. There's something called siliceous tuff. There's a really nice example of siliceous tuff actually near our former entrance off of South Street, where there's a plaque commemorating the acquisition of that land actually embedded in the tuff. So if you want a nice example of local geology, just look for the plaque off South Street. So we zoom forward, we're now in the range of tens of thousands of years ago, not millions of years ago. Roughly 75,000 years ago, an ice sheet called the Laurentide ice sheet grew south out of northern Canada into modern day Massachusetts. And then that same ice sheet retreated roughly 12,000 years ago. As glaciers flow south and then melt kind of back north, they leave marks behind. And so they scrape and scar the rocks. Much of that scraping and scarring is still evident today. Some of the more dramatic features they leave behind is glacial activity will leave behind drumlins, which are hills which are shaped in a way that reveals the manner that the glacier advanced and retreated. So Babson Hill in Wellesley is a prime example of a glacial drumlin. Drumlin Farm, which is also part of our Metrowest collection of sanctuaries, is another example. Glaciers leave behind kettle ponds. Kettle ponds are depressions formed by pieces of glacier which are left behind. Most notably, right next to Broadmoor are Farm Pond and Little Farm Pond, which are both left in depressions left behind by the retreating glacier. And glaciers also leave behind eskers, which are these really fascinating formations, essentially the deposits left from a river flowing underneath the glacier. And so they leave these really interesting, sinuous, really dramatic paths of rock. Modern day South Street was built on top of a glacier, which runs along the southern end of Broadmoor. It's a little bit hard to see in this picture because this is a view from the overlook at Broadmoor. South Street is the tree-lined esker in the distance, but also really nice evidence of glacial activity and a component of our ancient history which has affected the ways that human beings have interacted with Broadmoor throughout its history. And with that, I'm going to bring us up to the last 4,000 years, and we'll hand things over to Elissa.
Great. So as the glacier retreated, people came into North, Central, and South America. At first, they were nomadic and hunted and gathered. And we can imagine that an early hunter might have aimed at a deer and either missed, or the deer might have taken off with the spear embedded in it. And next slide, please. And this spear point was found along a trail and dated to 4,000 years ago by UMass Boston Anthropology Department. Fascinating find that really reminds us of the people that lived on this land in the past. Not an unusual spear point. It was easily identified right away. It was very common for people to find spear points like this in eastern Massachusetts and throughout New England. So the hunters and gatherers began to settle down in places and form villages. Next slide, please. And as many of you know, the land around South Natick, Dedham, Needham, Wellesley, had a variety of native villages, and they grew crops. They took the Charles River to get to Boston Harbor to collect fish and clams. And they took their corn, which was one of the crops, downstream and upstream to Watertown and Medfield to be ground. That was quite a trip. So in the 1600s, they invited a carpenter from Sherburne to build a grist mill. And later a sawmill was built. Today, the waterfalls at Broadmoor, which are popular sites for visitors, are the remnants of the locations of the sawmill and grist mill. This is the grist mill building that was actually in place into the 1950s. Next slide, please. The first piece of property given to Mass Audubon was called Little Farm Pond in Sherburne. It was donated in the 1960s. And as Scott said, it was a kettle pond. It was formed by a big chunk of ice. This is about 23 acres in size. And one of the interesting features is in the upper left-hand picture, there's a marsh. And in that marsh are carnivorous plants, including pitcher plants and Venus flytraps, the only place on the sanctuary and one of the few places in Eastern Mass where you can see those species. So this was about 250 acres of land. Next slide. Which was joined by about another 250 acres when Carl Stillman donated what he called Broadmoor. This was an adjacent estate, and between the two estates, Little Pond and Broadmoor, Broadmoor became about 500 acres in size, owned by Mass Audubon in the 1960s. At that time, when these properties were donated, most of the land was still open. The result of timbering and farming and pasture. Broadmoor, in fact, was a dairy farm up until the 1950s. And so much of what you see today is forest that has returned since the deforestation that happened after Europeans moved onto the land. Next slide, please. So the third major addition to Broadmoor was Red Wing Farm. Now, Red Wing Farm was not named for the red-winged blackbirds that you see from the boardwalk today, but instead for the Rhode Island red chickens that were raised in the barn. George and Arthur Middlemas, shown on the left, were the farmers, and they would raise 20,000 chickens at a time on the 4 floors of the barn. And when Mass Audubon acquired the property in 1973, they were 2 feet, chicken manure was 2 feet deep on all the floors. You can still see the patina left by cleaning up the chicken manure on the main floor of the Nature Center today. If you go look at the original floor, you can see this wonderful deep brown color. So George and Arthur Middlemas sold their farm in the 1970s, and they delighted in seeing what Mass Audubon did with their land and loved to come to events. And here a youngster is sharing some cider with George on the left and Arthur on the right. George lived to be 103 and played bridge until the last week of his life. And he was a great source of what it was like to farm in the 1900s on this property. Next slide. So with the addition of Red Wing Farm, Mass Audubon had frontage on Route 16, which allowed the addition of a large parking lot and the use of the barn that the Middlemas brothers sold as a nature center. So Mass Audubon has been leading by example for quite a while. And in 1983, the Middlemas barn was renovated as a state-of-the-art, award-winning nature center. It won national awards and state awards for energy efficiency. In 2013, 30 years later, it was renovated a second time, and 124 solar panels were added. At present, it produces more energy than it uses, making it net negative carbon. We sell some of the energy produced at Broadmoor to another of our sites in Lincoln. Next slide. So Broadmoor is all about water. It's right in the heart of the Charles River watershed, and the Charles River runs from Hopkinton to Boston. And as we all know, the marathon runners run from Hopkinton to Boston in 26 miles. It takes the Charles River 80 miles to get from Hopkinton to Boston. That's a sinuous remnant of the glaciation of this area. So Broadmoor is right in the heart at mile 40 and protects 800 acres by both ownership and conservation restriction. But the real value for habitat is that it connects to 8,000 acres of contiguous habitat, which means that whole populations of plants and animals are healthy, are protected and healthy. And a little more about management and how to maintain those healthy habitats in the next couple of slides. Next slide, please. So Indian Brook is a major tributary to the Charles. It originates in Natick and Sherburne, where the old landfills were located, and where Sassamon Trace Golf Course is at present in Natick. And it flows through the neighborhoods and into Broadmoor and drains 2,400 acres of water, of land. And it all flows through the sanctuary and into the Charles River. It forms kettle hole ponds, it forms vernal pools that are also tiny kettle holes. It forms streams, ponds, and is a rich habitat for a huge variety of wildlife. Next slide, please. There are more than 500 species of plants that have been identified at Broadmoor, 175 species of birds. Great blue herons have nested, fish, turtles, dragonflies, and numerous flowers, aquatic and terrestrial. One of the favorite things that children like to do is come and count the turtles. And I think the record is something like 40 turtles, but that's a great competition. How many turtles can you see at one time? All that water makes for very rich habitat. Next slide. Broadmoor is all about discovery, whether you're a child or an adult, whether you are a family or a school class. It's a place that you can enjoy guided and unguided tours. Here we have a family that's looking at the plants and animals that have been pulled from the aquatic environment, and they're examining what lives underwater and how does it live underwater and what's its life history. Large numbers of school field trips visit Broadmoor. That of course waned during COVID, but they're coming back. And Mass Audubon offers teacher training that allows teachers to learn how to use these field experiences in their classrooms and build on them. So we teach children directly, but we also teach the teachers who teach children. And exploring life in the water is one of the most fun things to do at the sanctuary. Next. So what's new? What's new right now is spring ephemerals. Ephemeral is something that's short-lived. And what spring ephemerals are wildflowers that bloom very briefly. This little flower on the left is called round-lobed hepatica. It's quite a name, but it's a tiny wildflower. And it only comes up poking its way through the oak leaves very early spring. It's dependent on the fact that trees don't leaf out until later on. It gets the heat and light it needs to form flowers and seeds, and then it dies back. Try to find round-lobed hepatica in August. You might get lucky and find a leaf, but most of them are totally gone. And one of the things that's threatening these beautiful little ephemerals are non-native plants. Why? Because non-natives tend to leaf out earlier. A plant you might know, some of the honeysuckles are introduced. There is one native, but there are a number of introduced honeysuckles, and they are leafing out right now. And where they're dense, they can shade out these little ephemerals and threaten their survival. So we have a variety of nature walks scheduled for this spring and summer. And if you want to go see this little one right now, this week, before it goes away, you can walk the Old Orchard Trail until it intersects. This is just below South Street, that esker that Scott described, and walk toward the west. And just before you enter the woods, on your left, you'll see a bunch of patches of this little round-lobed hepatica. Next slide, please. So this bird on the left may look like a tropical bird, one of those colorful tropical species. And that's not surprising because it is. It's a tropical species half the year. You can find them in Panama and northern Colombia during our winter. They will be back probably in the next couple of weeks. These are called scarlet tanagers, and they're one of the most beautiful migrants, and they're dependent on insects. So one of the things that happens at Broadmoor is field research. We've partnered with colleges, universities, student interns to study a variety of things. One of the big ones is insects, because so many plants depend on insects for pollination, and so many birds depend on insects for food. We are expecting an intern from Wellesley College this summer, and an AmeriCorps service member will be joining us next fall for an 11-month term in which they will be working on research in addition to other projects. The important thing for these scarlet tanagers is lots of contiguous forest. So the 800 acres we protect, a lot of it is forest, and that's important. But those 8,000 connecting acres are even more important. So you have enough scarlet tanagers nesting near each other to form a healthy population. Next slide, please. So one of Mass Audubon's focuses in the coming year is sustainable forest management. And to keep forests healthy doesn't just happen in our present world. We need to create ecological management plans that identify what's there. We need to do management that maintains different age classes. So you may see some beautiful old trees, but if you don't see any young baby trees, you're not going to have a healthy forest. Invasive plants are one factor that can influence the forest structure, and so can animals like deer browse, and invasive insects. So Mass Audubon's working hard on sustainable management, and also doing quite a bit to educate people who own private land and other conservation organizations in how to manage forests sustainably. Next slide, please. One of the things we've been doing at Broadmoor for the past 5 years is preserving the path. Paths are how we connect people and nature. And we studied the 7.5 miles of trails at Broadmoor about 5 years ago, and a plan was created to identify which trails were needed, where they could go, how to design them to be comfortable and safe for visitors, and how to design them to protect wildlife. So thanks to many of you in the audience, we were able to raise $420,000 to implement the plan for trail improvements, and to use the opportunity to train others in how to make good trails and how to maintain good trails. In fact, we are working with the trail committee in the town of Natick on some trails and trying to share what we've learned so that we can help the town improve their trails as well. So land protection, we protect over 40,000 acres within the state, is critical. And then land stewardship is critical and ongoing. Staff are important, as are volunteers. Just this morning, we completed 50 feet of new Puncheon Bridge, which is a boardwalk-like structure on the Glacial Hill Trail. So if you've walked recently and found those muddy spots that forced you off the trail to walk comfortably, come back in a couple of days and you will have a very nice boardwalk to walk on. And the reason that's important is when you step off a trail to avoid spots that are uncomfortable, you are affecting the habitat. You're compacting plants, you're compacting soil, and I'm sure we've all seen trails that have gradually gone from being 6 feet wide to being 10 and 20 feet wide in areas that haven't been taken care of properly. Next slide, please. So we are committed to accessibility, and in 1999, our 500-foot boardwalk opened as part of a nearly 2/3 mile accessible trail. These trails take you through the wetlands, they take you through the forests, they give you views of the fields. They're great for school field trips. If you know anybody who uses a mobility device, the entire 2/3 of a mile is accessible to people with wheelchairs, walkers. If you're pushing a stroller, it's very comfortable. And if you have visual impairment, you can use it as well. So we're very pleased with the boardwalk. It's a favorite of many visitors. Next, please. So Mass Audubon's working hard to include everyone. We have programs in schools. We have virtual programs. We have out-of-school programs after school, and the accessible trails. We've exported a program from Drumlin Farm it's called LEAF, and it's an internship that teaches people how to work. It's a, I don't know what I want to say. It's a professional conservation internship that a variety of people have taken, and we've exported it to Broadmoor for people with special needs. We're also communicating in multiple languages, and we're constantly evolving what we mean by including everyone. This young woman is using the Freedom Chair. The Freedom Chair was developed by MIT. It's a bicycle technology, and we have it available in our welcome area for loan. So if you want to try out the Freedom Chair, it's used with levers, or someone can push it, completely mechanical, not electric. And it actually can be a lot of fun if you have, if you want to go out on the trails in it and see how it works. But it's designed so that people can get a little assist when they need it. Next slide, please. So what's coming? Summer is coming, and there are going to be young birds and young people. Our summer camp begins in June and runs through August, and is nearly full. And young birds are will be starting to come out of the nests. And that always results in calls to the sanctuary about what do I do when I find a baby bird. So let me point you right now to the website. The website has a lot of information on what to do if you find a baby bird, a baby animal. The answer is don't try to raise it, but there are lots of things you can do to assist. In fall, which is probably one of the most beautiful seasons at Broadmoor, they're migrating monarchs and dragonflies and fruits and seeds, and photographers love Broadmoor in the fall. And we're open all year. So snowshoeing, skiing, animal tracking are just some of the things you can do in winter. And as we come out of COVID protocols, we're starting to offer more and more programs. So I hope Many of you will take advantage of that. Next, please. And these are just some of the ways you can connect. If you haven't visited Broadmoor, please do. We're inviting you to come and enjoy it. It's open Tuesday through Sundays, year round. We're closed Mondays, which is a time when we can do some of the work that requires heavy equipment and might be a hazard to visitors. You can learn with a naturalist. You can book a naturalist for a group, or you can take one of the programs we've offered. You can volunteer. So there's a brand new program that's just up on our website called Climate Champions. And this is a training program for people for whom climate advocacy rings a bell, to get as many people as we can across the state trained to help assist our staff in climate advocacy. You can sign up online. There's a little brief questionnaire, and you will have the support of dedicated staff to learn more about climate activism and how you can help. Land stewardship, as I said, is never ending, and we can use help with trail maintenance and pulling invasive plants and lots of other projects. Or you can join the staff. We have a number of openings at Mass Audubon at present, and some people make career changes, and we've had the benefit of some highly trained people joining our IT staff, for example, from the private sector. So if you're interested in conservation and want to make a change, now might be the time. Or if you're a young person and want to enter the field, take a look at what is on offer there. So lots of ways that you can connect. Next, please. So we hope you'll join us. We hope you'll join Mass Audubon. That's one way to support us. And I know many of you are members. And we thank you very much for inviting us to share as neighbors this evening with Natick Historical Society. Natick Historical is even older than Mass Audubon. Very impressed. And I just want to thank a few people for letting us share their slides. Dave Parrish, Emily Dahl, and Cheryl Rose were very generous with their beautiful images. So thank you very much. And now we're happy to answer questions.
Well, thank you so much, Scott and Elissa. That was wonderful. A fabulous long view of the history of Broadmoor.